before we dive in, viewer discretion is advised. This content is for entertainment. What happens when one of television's most formidable titans finds himself ensnared in the most hostile interview of his life? It is a moment of pure, uncut television chaos that no one, least of all a master showman like Steve Harvey, could ever see coming. He had entered that studio anticipating a friendly volley of questions, a routine charm offensive. After all, The View had always been a safe harbor. But what was about to unfold was a televised ambush. A confrontation so shocking it would leave the nation stunned and debating for weeks. Before we plunge into the heart of this on-air battle, secure your subscription and drop a comment below. Which talk show host do you believe is the ultimate master of on-screen conflict? Believe me, by the end of this breakdown, your entire view of the polished world of daytime television will be irrevocably altered. Because this wasn't just an interview spiraling out of control. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, ego, and the raw, untamed danger of a live broadcast. It all ignited on a seemingly routine Tuesday morning. Steve Harvey strode onto View's set, brandishing his iconic high-wattage smile, the one millions of Americans equated with humor, wisdom, and that undeniable Steve Harvey swagger. His suit was immaculate, a deep navy armor with a patterned tie that broadcasted confidence without arrogance. As he approached the guest chair, he gave his jacket a practiced casual tug, the gesture of a king, completely at home in his court. The studio audience erupted in a wave of thunderous applause, a roar of approval that bounced off the blinding stage lights and the unblinking lenses of the cameras. These were his people, fans who had followed his career for decades, their faces beaming with pure adoration. The atmosphere was electric, a celebration for a man who had perfected the art of connecting with the human heart. His hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Sunny host greeted him with radiant smiles and welcoming gestures. Their collective energy promised a smooth, amicable conversation. Whoopi, the seasoned captain of the ship, leaned forward with her signature blend of authority and warmth, poised to navigate the interview. But then there was Joy Behar, positioned at the far edge of the table like a predator lying in wait. Her posture was a fortress body angled away, arms locked across her chest. While others radiated warmth, her expression was a mask of cold, sharp calculation. Steve's internal alarm sounded almost immediately. A career under the spotlight had honed his instincts for hostility. He saw the warning sign, but chose to dismiss it as the typical jitters of live television. Steve Harvey, everyone. Whoopi's legendary voice boomed as the applause surged once more. "We are so excited to have you here today." "Thank you for having me," Steve countered, flashing that million-dollar grin. It was a very smile that had cemented his legacy in the pantheon of entertainment. "Always a pleasure to be with you ladies." Sarah Haynes opened the exchange, her tone bright and engaging. "So, Steve," she started, "your new book about relationships is a runaway success. What inspired you to write another guide for couples?" Steve leaned into the question, resting his elbows on his knees. This was his arena. Relationship advice, a potent cocktail of comedy and wisdom. He was in his element, ready to deliver the charismatic performance his audience craved. "You know, Sarah," he began, his voice a smooth rhythm of pure confidence. "After decades of hosting Family Feud and connecting with thousands of families, I've learned that communication is the absolute key." He will a narrative of his encounters with every kind of couple imaginable. The newlyweds, the long-suffering partners, those on the precipice of collapse, and those who had lost the very words to express themselves. He shared the humor, the pain, and the hard-won truths he had collected. The audience was mesmerized, a sea of nodding heads and captivated faces. But as Steve held court, the camera's cold eye drifted to Joy. She wasn't nodding. She wasn't smiling. She offered no pretended of engagement. She simply watched him. Her gaze narrowed to a razor's edge. Her expression was a slow burn, a simmering intensity that foreshadowed an attack Steve Harvey was not prepared to face. What happened next would shatter the studio's cheerful facade. The laughter would cease, the tension would ignite, and one of entertainment's most unshakable men would be thrown into a battle that nobody saw coming. When couples stop really listening to each other, that's when the real problems begin. Steve declared, his tone resonating with the warm, steady confidence of a seasoned veteran. The audience murmured its assent. It was pure classic Steve Harvey, wise, poised, and effortlessly commanding. "That's beautiful," Sonny chimed in, offering him a supportive smile. "And the reviews for your book have been incredible," Sarah added with enthusiasm. But Joy Behar. Joy was shifting in her seat, a coiled serpent ready to strike. While the table remained relaxed, her expression was stone. Her jaw was rigid. Her eyes were sharp. Her body leaned forward, calculating the kill. And Steve, a man who could read a room in a heartbeat, felt the temperature drop. "Joy, you look like you have something to say," he teased, attempting to diffuse the building pressure with a light-hearted chuckle. He was trying to keep the energy breezy, but it was too late. Joy's eyes narrowed a fraction, a subtle but lethal shift. "Well, Steve," she began, her words slow and deliberate, "I've been reading your book, and I have to ask, don't you think it's a little hypocritical for someone who's been married 3 times to be giving relationship advice?" The air in the studio turned to ice. The background chatter died. The laughter evaporated, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as every person at the table froze in place. Sonny's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Sarah's smile collapsed into a mask of shock. Even Whoopi's eyes widened the unmistakable look of a host who knew they had just crossed into hostile territory. For a split second, Steve's million-dollar smile faltered. A crack in the armor, just long enough for the entire world to witness the sting before he recovered. "Joy," he said, his voice a pillar of calm. "I think my experiences, both good and challenging, actually give me more insight into what works and what doesn't." He pressed his hands together on the table as if to anchor himself against the coming storm. Every relationship teaches us something, but Joy was not there for a lesson. She was there for a fight. "But Steve," she pressed, leaning in, "you've publicly talked about your first 2 marriages ending in divorce. How can you sit here and tell other people how to make their marriages work when you couldn't make yours work?" Whoopi moved in fast, trying to de-escalate. "Joy, I think what Steve is saying is that no." "Whoopi!" Joy snapped, throwing up a hand to silence her. Let him answer. A collective gasp echoed to the stunned audience. Off camera, the producers were paralyzed. "I think our viewers deserve to know," Joy continued, her voice sharp with accusation, "why they should take relationship advice from someone with such a track record." Steve inhaled a long, slow breath through his nose. His jaw tightened, not in anger, but with the immense effort of a man containing a hurricane. Even under this brutal personal assault, Steve Harvey was professional. "Well," he said slowly, his voice still steady, but now carrying a new weight, a harder edge. "Joy, I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here," he stated, his gaze locking onto hers in a silent declaration that the rules of this game had just changed. "But I've been happily married to my wife, Marjorie, for over 15 years. We have a beautiful blended family. And yes, I learned from my past mistakes. That's what growth looks like." But Joy repeated the word, her laugh sharp enough to slice through the studio air. "Growth," she sneered. "Or is it just good marketing?" A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Joy folded her arms. "A smug fortress of judgment. I mean, how convenient," she pressed, "that your personal struggles become best-selling books." A wave of uneasy murmurs swept the room as Sarah, utterly mortified, raised a hand to her mouth. Sonny looked ready to leap across the table to rescue Steve from the ambush. Even the unflappable Whoopi was shifting uncomfortably, her expression a clear signal that this was spiraling out of control on live television. But Joy was nowhere near finished. "And another thing, Steve," she said, her voice dropping to an icy chill. "Those comedy specials from the 90s, she began, her words a calculated strike. Some of that material about women. It's aged poorly, hasn't it? So, how can anyone be sure your advice isn't just the same old, outdated thinking?" Steve placed his coffee mug on the table, but the gesture was anything but gentle. It landed with a muffled yet unmistakable thud, a sound the microphones greedily amplified. His patience, a thread stretched to its limit, was beginning to fray. "Joy," he said, turning to face her fully, his body language a wall of defiance. I came here to talk about helping people build stronger relationships, not to be put on trial for things I said decades ago as a comedian. His voice remained level, but it was now laced with steel, a clear warning, a boundary drawn in the sand. Comedy evolves, he continued, his gaze unwavering. People evolve, and I think my track record speaks for itself. A few audience members offered attentive applause, as if afraid to break the spell of the confrontation. Others just stared, their faces a massive shock at the raw intensity unfolding before them. This was no longer a playful disagreement. This was not a simple difference of opinion. This was Joy Behar conducting a full-scale interrogation on live television, and Steve Harvey refusing to be broken. The tension in the studio was a powder keg, and what happened next would ignite a firestorm across the nation. Does it though? Joy fired back instantly, her voice a razor's edge, slicing to the charged atmosphere. She didn't hesitate, not for a single breath, because from where I'm sitting, Steve, it looks a whole lot like you're profiting from giving advice on something you've struggled with your entire life. A low, ominous rumble moved through crowd. Steve blinked, the verbal blow landing with visible force. Stunned by the direct hit, he opened his mouth to respond, but Joy pressed on relentlessly. And frankly, she added, her emphasis on the word, a deliberate twist of the knife. Some of your past comments about women comments you made willingly suggest you might not be the best person to be telling them how to find love. The room went ice cold. Sonny's jaw hung slightly agape. Sarah looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Even Whoopi, a veteran of more on-air chaos than anyone in daytime television, seemed taken aback by how far Joy was willing to push this confrontation. Leaning in, Whoopi tried to intervene. Maybe we should talk about the positive feedback the book has received, she offered, a desperate attempt to regain control. No, Whoopi, Steve said, and his voice shifted. The calm was still there, but now it was a thin veneer over something hard, an unyielding and unmistakable edge that told everyone watching he had reached his limit. He turned his body fully toward Joy, locking his gaze on her. Joy wants to have this conversation, he announced, his voice low and steady. So let's have it, Joy. The very air in the studio seemed to change, thickening, tightening, crackling with electricity. You're sitting here, Steve continued, trying to tear me down in front of millions of viewers. And for what? What's your agenda here? Joy leaned back in her chair, a slow, satisfied smirk spreading across her face as if she'd just checkmated her king. My agenda is truth, Steve, she replied smugly. I think our viewers deserve to know who they're taking advice from. And honestly, she added, tilting her head with condescension, your defensive reaction is pretty telling. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Steve's eyes narrowed, his posture snapping ramrod straight. Defensive? He repeated, his voice rising, not yelling, but swelling with control power. You're attacking my character, my marriage, my career, and you expect me to sit here and just smile and nod? He pivoted toward the audience, bringing them into the arena. That's not happening, ladies and gentlemen. But Joy predictably was not done. She never was. Steve Harvey, everyone, she announced with dripping sarcasm, gesturing toward him like a ringmaster presenting a failed circus act. This is what happens when you ask legitimate questions. He falls apart. That crossed. A line. The sharp scrape of Steve's chair against the studio floor was like a gunshot. He was on his feet. The sudden movement jolted everyone on set. Sarah gasped audibly. Sonny instinctively reached out, as if to pull him back. Whoopi's eyes darted the production crew, who stood frozen behind their cameras. Steve planted both hands firmly on the table, leaning toward Joy, not with menace, but with an unshakable authority. He spoke. I'm not falling apart, Joy, he said, his voice low and resonant with power. I'm calling out your unprofessional behavior. He paused, letting the accusation hang in the stunned, silent air of the studio. This isn't journalism, he stated, each word delivered slowly and firmly. This is you trying to create a moment. Joy raised her eyebrows in feigned amusement, but for the first time, the smirk on her face wavered a tiny crack in the facade that everyone could feel. Steve had struck back harder than she ever anticipated. The tension had escalated to a level rarely witnessed on daytime television. Across the country, viewers leaned closer to their screens. In the studio, the live audience held a collective breath, caught between witnessing an explosive television moment and the complete implosion of an interview. And Steve Harvey, the king of calm humor, was now standing his ground with fire no one saw coming. But everyone would be talking about. What happened next would seal the fate of the segment, deciding if it would be a mere footnote or one of the most infamous on-air blow-ups in talk show history. "This is character assassination," Steve declared, his voice cutting to the silent studio like a crack of thunder. The room was so still you could hear the hum of the studio lights overhead. All around, audience members covered their mouths, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some leaned forward, terrified to blink and miss a single second of the drama. Others looked genuinely distressed. This was not the light-hearted television they had come to see. It had devolved into something raw, uncomfortable, and intensely personal. And at the table, the other co-hosts looked utterly paralyzed. They were frozen, caught between stepping in and staying out of line of fire. Sunny shot a nervous glance at Whoopi. Sarah clutched her note card so tightly her knuckles turned white. No one knew the right move. "Sit down, Steve," Joy commanded sharply. Her voice sliced through the tension, an attempt to reassert dominance. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm embarrassing myself," Steve repeated, a short, bitter laugh escaping his lips, a sound laced with more hurt than humor. "Joy, you spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on national television, and you think I'm the one who's embarrassed." He gestured to the audience, then locked his eyes back on her. "You know what's embarrassing? A grown woman who thinks bullying is good television." Joy face flushed a deep, furious red. "Bullying?" She snapped back. "I'm asking legitimate questions. Questions any responsible journalist would ask. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be on talk shows." "Legitimate questions," Steve echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. "Joy, you started this interview with an attack. You didn't ask about my book. You didn't ask about my family. You didn't ask about my work, my philanthropy, nothing. You went straight for the throat the moment I sat on this stage." He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. "That's not journalism. That's a hit job." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, rolling her eyes with theatrical disdain. "You're being dramatic. This is how interviews work in the real world. Steve, we don't just throw you softball questions so you can promote your book." Steve's composure finally began to fracture. He pointed a finger directly at her. "Joy, I've done thousands of interviews in my career. I've graced the stage of every major network, every flagship program. I recognize the chasm between a challenging inquiry and a targeted takedown." He jabbed a finger, an indictment aimed at the table, and what you're orchestrating falls squarely into the second category. Out of the stunned silence, Whoopi finally summoned her voice, raising her hands as if trying to play the force of nature. "Perhaps we should cut to a commercial." "No." Steve's word was a blade, slicing through her attempt. "Joy ignited this, and we will extinguish it here now." A wave of pure disbelief washed over the studio. No one, not the seasoned host, not the captive audience, was prepared for a guest to seize control of a live broadcast. Joy, arms folded across her chest, a shield of defiance. She leaned back, her expression a mask of pure provocation. "Fine, Steve. Let's see this through." She then surged forward, her eyes locking onto his like a predator. "You want to speak of personal assaults? Let's talk about you." Her finger jabbed the air, a weapon aimed directly at him. "Let's dissect the empire you built on the backs of female caricatures, on laughter aimed at them, on reducing them to simplistic punchlines, and now you dare to reinvent yourself as some sage of relationships." A harsh, derisive scoff escaped her lips. The audacity is breathtaking. At his sides, Steve's hands clenched into tight fists, not in threat, but in a desperate bid to contain the storm of anger, hurt, and sheer bewilderment raging within him. "Joy," he began, his voice low, a strained appeal for sanity. "You clearly harbor some deep-seated grievance against me, because this degree of animosity. This is not standard procedure." His hands opened, a gesture of raw confusion. "Did I slight you in some forgotten moment? Did a careless word at some industry gala wound you because this feels intensely personal? Don't flatter yourself, she retorted, the words snapping like ice. This has nothing to do with you personally. This is a matter of public reckoning. Accountability, Steve echoed, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You cannot simply erase your history. Joy pressed on relentless and demand we all suffer from amnesia. My past. Steve's voice fractured, not from weakness, but from the staggering shock of her cruelty. He took a half step back, drawing a breath that seemed to pull all the oxygen from the room. Joy, my past is sleeping in a car because I had no home. It's working every menial job imaginable just to eat. My past is clawing my way up from absolute zero to create an enterprise that supports hundreds of families. With each word, his voice swelled, fortified. By truth, my past is pouring millions into charitable causes, guiding the next generation of comics, lifting up children who were dealt an impossible hand. He gestured to the silent crowd. But you want to crucify me for punchlines I delivered 30 years ago. Joy dismisses life's work with a flick of her wrist, as if shooing an insect. Oh! Spare us the melodrama. A collective gasp rippled through the audience, a sound of shared shock. Steve, countless people have conquered hardship, she continued, her voice dripping with condescension, without building a career on demeaning women. A heavy silence descended upon the set. Into that void, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was a fragile, trembling thread of sanity. Joy, I believe we might be crossing a line, but it was too late. The boundary had been shattered. The confrontation had just cemented its place as one of the most volatile exchanges ever witnessed on daytime television history, and the storm had not yet passed. This is a public dismantling of a man's character, Steve declared, his voice echoing through the tomb's silent studio like a thunderclap. The air grew so thick you could almost feel the hum of the studio lights burning overhead. Audience members shielded their mouths, their eyes wide with shock. Some leaned in, prisoners to the spectacle, terrified to miss a single, devastating second. Others appeared genuinely pained. This was not the breezy, light-hearted morning chat they had come to see. It had spiraled into something visceral, raw, and uncomfortably real. At the host's table, the other women were like statues, paralyzed by the unfolding drama. Their eyes were wide, their bodies frozen, caught between the instinct to intervene and the fear of stepping into the crossfire. Sonny shot a panicked glance at Whoopi. Sarah's knuckles turned white as she gripped her note cards. The rules of engagement had vanished. Sit down, Steve, Joy commanded, her voice a whip cracking through the tension. You are making a spectacle of yourself. I'm making a spectacle. He shot back, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping his lips, containing far more pain than humor. Joy, you have dedicated the last 10 minutes to attempting my public humiliation, and you have the audacity to claim I'm the one causing a scene. His arm swept towards a stunned audience, then snapped back to point at her. Do you want to know what's truly a spectacle? A grown woman who mistakes cruelty for compelling television. Joy face ignited in a furious shade of crimson. Cruelty, she seethed. I am posing legitimate questions. Questions any credible journalist would be obligated to ask. If you are incapable of handling them, perhaps you should avoid the talk show circuit entirely. Legitimate questions. Steve's voice rose, a crescendo of disbelief. Joy, you opened the segment with a full frontal assault. You didn't inquire about my new book. You didn't inquire about my children. You didn't inquire about my charitable work. Nothing. You came for the jugular the second my shoes touched this stage. He shook his head, the bewilderment carved into his expression. That isn't journalism. That's a premeditated takedown. Oh, please, Joy scoffed, her eyes rolling with theatrical disdain. You're being overly dramatic. This is a reality of interviews in the big leagues, Steve. We don't just serve up easy pitches so you can hawk your latest project. Steve's finger was now leveled at her, his formidable composure finally beginning to crack. Joy, I have sat through thousands of interviews in my career. I've been on every major network, every major show. I know the difference between tough questions and personal attacks. He jabbed a finger toward the table. And what you're doing is the latter. Finally, Whoopi found her voice, raising her hand slightly as though trying to calm a storm. Maybe we should take a commercial break. No, Steve cut in sharply. Joy started this, and we're going to finish it right here, right now. A ripple of astonishment moved through the studio. No one, not the host, not the audience, was prepared for Steve Harvey to refuse a commercial break. Joy crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair, her expression almost taunting. Fine, Steve. Let's finish this. She leaned forward again, locking eyes with him. You want to talk about personal attacks? Let's talk about you, she pointed accusingly. Let's talk about how you made a career out of stereotyping women, laughing at them, simplifying them, and now you're trying to rebrand yourself as some kind of relationship guru. She scoffed loudly. The hypocrisy is stunning. Steve's hands curled into fists at his sides. Not raised, not threatening, but tight with emotion. Anger, hurt, disbelief. Joy, he said slowly, almost pleading for reason. You clearly have some personal issue with me because there's a level of hostility. This isn't normal. He spread his hands in a gesture of confusion. Did I offend you somehow? Did I hurt your feelings at some industry event? Because this feels personal. Joy shot back instantly. Don't flatter yourself. Her tone had ice in it. This isn't personal. This is about accountability. Accountability. Steve repeated incredulously. You can't just reinvent yourself, Joy continued, and expect everyone to forget your past. My past, Steve said, his voice cracking, not from weakness, but from the shock of how far she was willing to go. He stepped back slightly, drawing a deep breath. Joy, my past includes growing up homeless, sleeping in my car, working every job I could find just to survive. My past includes grinding my way from nothing to building a media empire that employs hundreds of people. His voice gained strength with every word. My past includes giving millions to charity, mentoring young comedians, helping kids who didn't have a chance. He pointed to the audience again, but you want to focus on jokes I told 30 years ago. Joy waved her hand as if swatting away a fly. Oh, here comes a sober story. Gasps echoed from the audience. Steve, plenty of people overcome adversity. She continued without making degrading comments about women along the way. The table fell silent again, and then finally Sarah spoke up. Her voice trembled, fragile but sincere. Joy, I think maybe we're going too far. But by then the damage was done. The line had been crossed. The confrontation had officially become one of the most explosive moments in daytime.